Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Now, our guest today is Keith Hodge. Keith Hodge is the founder of Intuity International and an instructor at an international healing academy. You can find out more about Keith Hodge and his wonderful work at his website, intuityinternational.com. Welcome, Keith Hodge.
Thank you for having me here.
So here on this show, the Natural Healing Show, we talk with expert healers such as yourself from all over the world. And you are coming to us today from Ibiza, right?
Yes, Ibiza is one of the Balearic Islands off of Spain.
Oh, beautiful. And we talk about many forms of natural healing. Today, we're going to be talking about ancestral healing. What is ancestral healing?
So, ancestral healing is where we have been born into a lineage of wounding, you could say. For example, perhaps our grandfather had a big loss, and then his way of being was founded on the fact he was wounded from loss, and then he didn't deal with that in his life, so his behavior then passes on to his daughter and then on to the person that comes into the clinic. Like there's just like a lineage that and it would differ from, but also be linked to personal wounding, like inner child wounding, which a lot of therapies focus on. And for me, the ancestral wounds are important and probably going to be a growing area of therapeutic healing within our lifetime, I would say.
Okay, now in my work as a medical intuitive healer, I talk about what I refer to as genomes, which are genetic patterns. And one of the things that we know is that you got 50% of your DNA from your mother and 50% of your DNA from your father. And you got 25% of your DNA from each of your grandparents and 12.5% of your DNA from each of your great grandparents, and it goes back from there. So we definitely have genetic issues that are brought forward, but there's also, again, something called a genome, which is a genetic thought pattern. And this genetic thought pattern could affect any aspect of our being, whether it's our financial, how we handle money, how we handle our relationships, our addictive tendencies, and really, truly any aspect of our being. I remember years ago doing a healing with a woman, and every woman in her family, when they got to their mid-30s, had to have a hysterectomy. So it was a genetic pattern for sure. So Keith Hodge, founder of Intuity International, can you give us some examples for our audience of kinds of issues that an ancestral healing may affect?
I often see it emotionally, so with emotional patterns that are passed down through the generations. I actually just created a film where the main character has anger or rage and then passes it on to her baby son and how he goes to heal that. But that's a good example. Anger, it could be like a deep loss or anxieties. And for me, whether we trace it to this life or past lives, the emotion is felt in the body. So the first stage is to guide people into feeling. I'm sure you see that as well. Like there's a place within the body where we feel emotion, and that can be the root into the roots of where it founded. And often when tracing, say, an inner child, and then you heal the inner child from age 5 and you can't see anything further, the client can't see anything further, then that's an indication that it's probably past life or ancestral at the root of where it began. Otherwise, it would have cleared from the system. Yeah.
Yes. Now, when I'm doing healing, in my healing work, let's say, for example, that someone wants to clear the pattern of addiction. I'll find the age or the ages at which significant events triggered or started the pattern. And sometimes it goes all the way back through our lifetime. Sometimes it goes into past lives, and sometimes it goes into what we're talking about today, which is ancestral, which is, did it start on the maternal line? And then you have to go back. Did it start with my mother, my grandmother, my great grandmother, or did it start on the paternal line? Did it start with my father, my grandfather, or my great grandfather? And I can give lots of examples about patterns that started with ancestors. For example, I remember years ago dealing with somebody who always had trouble with money. And we did an ancestral healing with a healing that I call a 7-generation healing. And we looked at, I believe in her case, we went through the paternal line, her father, her grandfather, her great grandfather, and going all the way back to 7 generations. And we went through the patterns of how these individuals, how her ancestors had dealt with money, their feelings about money, and what they had learned and not learned about money. Another example, I remember years ago working with a lady who had struggled with alcoholism, and she'd been clean, I believe, for 7 years, but was still really struggling. And she said, I'll never forget, she said, it's like I swept that floor and swept that floor. And I'm like, it didn't start with you. And I think that many people who are struggling with addictions, they're absolutely dealing with ancestral issues. And both at the chemical level, but also at the genome level, where there's thoughts and emotions like you're talking about that are being carried forward. And certainly, for sure, health issues can start, whereas everybody in my family gets this kind of cancer, or everybody in my family gets this kind of heart disease. And when you see that as an individual, when you look around at your ancestors and recognize the challenges that they are dealing with, you have to wonder, am I bringing this forward either as a genome, as a genetic thought pattern, or actually at the cellular level in my DNA?
Yeah, I work with psychic surgery, and I see that with shifting DNA, and the more physical site or ancestral healing. I agree. These things can be passed on, and it's up to us to be brave enough to face what's been passed and heal it within our system, so that we don't have to express that pathology any further.
Yes. So you just mentioned psychic surgery, and many of our audience may have heard of energy healing. What is psychic surgery?
Psychic surgery is a healing system that's specialized in the physical, and the healing systems I teach are with guide teams. So many people listening may have heard of guides or work with guides, and it's something I teach in my academy. Most people have a main guide, a spiritual advisor that guides them through the path, and a healing guide. And for those that become more specialized in the physical, they have a psychic surgeon guide. And these guides have trained very deeply into the specifics of how to, there's a technique I teach called the blueprint. So you map out the physical spectrum of energy, from the very dense, like the bones, to the very light, like the etheric body, the aura, and everything in between. So you can pinpoint, okay, it's in this part, it's in the liver, that this issue's held, and then you can start to trace, okay, so this liver in the liver is past life. And so it links to what I'm saying with the ancestral that we're talking about, like a physical issue may be ancestral in the body, but it may be from some other pathway. and psychic surgeons can help shift the DNA. So that's kind of an overview of what psychic surgery can help.
So how does psychic surgery differ from energy healing?
It is energy healing. It's a form of energy healing. Yeah.
Now, I understand that you have recently filmed a movie about ancestral healing. Can you share with us what this film is about and when it'll be available?
Yes. So this is been filmed in Ibiza and with some beautiful people of the island, and we're going to be launching it here in June, and then we'll be creating an online version for people to enjoy. And I run an event called Intuity Bliss, which is monthly and it's free, and it's an ambient healing set that I DJ whilst guiding through a particular healing topic. Like this month's one was on power retrieval, and next month's will be on the throat chakra, how to open the voice, the expression. And so the film is an Intuity Bliss on ancestral healing, and it starts with a character in our generation who is clearly expressing anger and upset with her partner, and then the movie takes it back to, like, it's tracing this sort of tree back to the source, and you see different ancestors, and then so it's another 5 generations back from her is the female that, to begin with, you see her like happy with her partner, enjoying life, and then he meets another woman and leaves her, and then this sort of rage appears in her system. So you can see where the origin has come from, and then you come back to the character. She's pregnant and she gives birth to this baby boy who also inherits the rage, and that the film is on his journey to meet a shaman and to heal this, to do a journey back himself to the ancestor and to heal this wound. And so the audience will listen to the music set that I'm DJing and my guidance of their own ancestral healing, whilst watching the journey of the characters on the, and we'll project it like onto a dome. There's a beautiful dome in Ibiza that we're going to use, and yeah, looking forward to launching that.
Okay, and that's in June 2022, and people will be listening to this interview for probably years to come. But
yeah, so there will be an online version being created, and we can link it, I guess, to these videos, right? So people can check it out. Yeah.
Yeah, and that video will be available on your YouTube channel. Is that right?
The trailer is already available on the YouTube channel. The video itself will be a paid offering through my website for those that wish to experience it. Yeah.
Okay. Now, when I do ancestral healing, I do what's called a 7 generations balance.
Mm-hmm.
The way, and I'll describe for our audience the way that it goes. So somebody will come to me with an issue, and again, it could be an issue about money, an issue about relationships, an issue about their health, any issue that they're really struggling with. And then I'll figure out which lineage this pattern started with. Again, did it start with the maternal line? Did it start with the paternal line? And certainly when it comes to our deep issues, we can absolutely get them from both our maternal ancestors and our paternal ancestors, but I'll pick the priority. And then the way that it works is I'll have my client, we actually call in that ancestor. So we call in, so let's say we're going through the paternal line, we'll call in the soul of their father, and my client will have an actual conversation with the soul of their father. And then we'll call in their paternal grandfather, and then the client will talk to their paternal grandfather, and so on, all the way back 7 generations. And when you go back 7 generations, you're going back to, I believe, 1.25% of your DNA. And every time I do this healing, I have never done this healing without the client actually breaking down in tears, because they realize that their ancestors are absolutely rooting for them. And you are literally as they say, you are the result of the love of thousands. and
Mhm.
we're bringing forth their DNA. Now, Keith Hodge, as someone who practices ancestral healing, do you believe our ancestors can help us resolve challenges we're facing in our current lives?
Yes, I really like the way you do it. I believe our ancestors have gifts, and we can connect with those gifts. I usually, it's the same with past lives. The most common way to go into this is because there's a wound that one or many of them carry, and so in that case, we're not going in for their teachings or advice. We're going in to support them to complete on that life that they went through. And I hear that the 1.25%, 7 generations, that makes sense with the physical, the DNA. I guess the main area that I do ancestral healing is the sort of the psycho-emotional, the states of being that have been created by trauma, by wounding. And it could go back 7 generations, it could go back much further than that. It's like this, it's been passed down, and it's a behavioral thing more than a DNA thing, I find. And then it gets expressed one way or the other through the duality. So if one person's raging, another person might be really fearful of anger, So each ancestor might position himself somewhere on that spectrum. And we're going in to the original ancestor who experienced this, and then the client meets them and they're supporting their ancestor in being able to express and to move through and to heal what was once created. And then they release, they go into the light, so they're no longer stuck in this lineage. And then every other ancestor that follows them has the opportunity, if they want to let go. They also have the opportunity to hold it because it's free will. And then it will become a personal wound at that point, and then it goes all the way into the client, and they feel it release from their body.
Very powerful. And I appreciate what you said, because I interview a lot of different healers, and I joke it's like cooking. It's like, how do you cook your vegetable soup? It might be a little bit different. So when we do this ancestral healing, in your experience, does it clear issues forward so that our children and their children no longer struggle with these patterns?
100%, if the children haven't arrived yet.
Yeah.
And if they are already birthed and adults, for example, then what it does is it makes it easier for them. They still have to choose, is this going to be a personal wound of mine, or am I going to jump on the back of this shift that my mum or dad's done and release it all really quickly? And that depends on their consciousness level at the time. Yeah.
Okay, now with that great insight, we're going to take a break and listen to a message from one of our commercial sponsors. Keith Hodge, founder of Intuity International. When a person has done a lot of inner work already and still feels stuck with a particular issue, why do you think it can be so helpful to do ancestral healing?
Well, I think ancestral healing, just to be clear, is one of the options, as you've named as well. So I think for a good healer, they will be able to sense where the root of the issue lies. And then one of those tools may be to take their client into an ancestral wound. And if it is an ancestral wound, it's absolutely key, in my opinion, because I don't know how else they would heal it until they help the ancestor to heal. It's like it gets passed on, and then someone has to unplug it. And so that's the gift that you're giving to your client, is that they get to be the one who unplugs from it. And no amount of inner child healing would transform the wound. In fact, a lot of people have already done all the inner child healing when they find their way into ancestral healing.
Yes, for sure. Now, what, in your professional opinion, what is the difference between ancestral healing and past life healing?
Well, ancestral is not personal. So we're born into a lineage, and then our parent that has that issue will behave a certain way with us when we're young, and then we take it on as the way the world is. Okay, so that isn't the same as a personal wound when we're a child, where a kid steals our favorite pencil and it creates a trauma, like, or mum doesn't come to us and, we feel like she doesn't love us, all that personal wounding stuff that we deal with in a child. So that personal wounding is past life. So we're just going back beyond being in the womb, which is the first moment in this life that we'd need to work into, back into someone that we were in a different life, that completed their life with a trauma still alive. And so it's not, as I say, it's often the traumas that as healers we're working with. We could go and trace gifts that, we were a Buddhist monk and we learned the art of presence and connect in with those things. And it's all personal. So that's the difference between ancestral and past life.
Okay, great explanation. I would add to that again, as we've been talking about, we have ancestors and we're bringing forth their patterns. Past life is our past lives. So and not that I know anything, but as a soul, we've been incarnated in many bodies throughout the millennia, and we've had many experiences. So when we go into past life healing, we go into what your soul experienced in different bodies in past lives.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So as a medical intuitive healer, if I'm looking at a pattern, I'll look at, how many past lives did this person, did this soul struggle with this issue? And how many past lives, when was that? And, what were the issues at that time?
Yeah, I think we've got a similar crossover of work. For me, I don't tend to look at how many, I look at the strongest, the most impactful life, or the origin. And I find between those two, it's like a thread comes out in all the other lives.
Yes. Could you give an example for our audience from your work of an example of an issue that was a past life issue for a client, and then another issue that was an ancestral issue?
Yeah, sure. When I was just thinking of an ancestral one that I traced, it was really crazy, actually. Like I was sitting out in my beautiful wild garden here in Ibiza, and I had felt this sort of anxiety in my body that I was like, I need to trace this and see what it's coming from. And then as I traced it, I just kept going back and back and back ancestrally. And I ended up seeing this man in a cave, and he was petrified. The world didn't occur to him as safe. And he had lost a child to a wild animal, been eaten, and he was like, how do I protect the rest of my family from this unsafe world? And this is this sort of like primal fear was in him, and I helped him to heal that, to release that. And I was like, wow, I mean, must be going back thousands of years here to this man that is still carried in me, in my body to this day. Yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah. And so that would have been an example of an ancestral healing.
That's ancestral. Yeah. Past life, I mean, I could pick dozens, but there's one that stands out, of like a woman that was her voice was restricted, and when we traced this fear, there was an anger as well. There was a memory of a past life where she was in the village, in the square, and being accused of being a witch. And being forced to own up to that, and not expressing herself, just closing down, not saying anything, and then being hung in this, like, the memory of the noose around the throat. And there's huge anger needed to come out of that. It's like, because, you know, probably just being a herbalist or something in those, like, times, and then and being really shut down and persecuted. And so that gets stored, it gets stored in the body, like the memory of it, and it starts to come through again in this life. And then when she was able to let go, there was huge release and relief and tears, and then that life went into the light, and it's no longer being expressed in her being anymore. So that's just one example of past lives I could give. Yeah.
Really beautiful examples, and you gave an example from yourself. I'll give an example for myself. When I was younger, I struggled with a lot of depression, and I'll never forget doing a healing on the source of it. And in another lifetime, I had been one of the soldiers who crucified Christ. And I'll never forget, you know, having that memory of when I realized what I had done, just being just incredibly overcome with grief and regret and depression. And so again, a lot of the stuff that we carry forward, these deep issues, are again ancestral or past life. And I think it's important to look at both of them. Another example is of an issue that affects a lot of people. Many people have eating issues, all kinds of eating disorders, and anorexia, overeating, and so on. And another example for myself, and if you look at human history, I remember going back to a past life where I was starving. And so again, when we do our inner work, I think it's really important that we bring forth compassion for everything that humanity has experienced: the starvation, the wars, the torture, the slavery, you know, and all those really just incredibly soul-crushing events that shape us and have shaped humanity throughout lifetimes. If you can look back at your work with different clients in ancestral healing, can you share a story for us of perhaps the most profound ancestral healing that you've done with your clients?
Yeah, so ancestrally, I find that when there's, I think I remember a healing with a guy who's had a relative who went to war, and then he was in this place of, like, feeling guilty all the time, and like needing to please women. That was what he was working on with me at that session. And I don't remember how many generations, I think it was quite a long way back, and he found this ancestor, who'd gone to war and then come back to his partner having left him for another man, and then being torn between these two emotions of the guilt of, like, he should have stayed with his wife and looked after her and he loved her, and then the anger of, like, why didn't she give me the time to do what I needed to do? And the very conflicting emotions that was passed all the way down to my client, and playing out in his body now. And that was a huge shift he went through as he saw that in himself.
Great story. Now, with that, we're going to take another break and listen to a message from one of our commercial sponsors. Keith Hodge, founder of Intuity International, you talk about the difference between living through the heart and living through the mind. What is the difference in your professional opinion?
Living through the heart is living in presence, in now, in knowing ourself, our soul, and what it's guiding us to do. And what it's guiding us to do is the next step. It's like, call that person, arrange this event. The mind is wanting to know the end result. So it's planning out everything. And what it's really doing is it's just sourcing what it already knows from the past and regurgitating it. So very little new happens when we live in the mind, but in the heart, it's a very creative source. And so that the mind is often regarded as pathological. It's not pathological. It just needs to be anchored in the heart. But we live in a world that is really focused just on mind. And I think that's one of the big areas that we're starting to shift as a race now. More and more people are realizing that there's this intuitive knowledge inside them that when they follow it, life starts to make sense.
Beautiful explanation. Now, in your work, I know that you use music. How do you use music in conjunction with ancestral healing?
So I spend a lot of time sourcing beautiful artist music, so that stuff that moves me personally, and then I DJ from different set lists that I have, like beginning sets, and building it in a certain story. So the music itself is telling a story. Like the last set I did was called Power Retrieval, and I selected a lot of powerful tracks, but the tracks are all in the ambient / sort of euphoric selection of music. And I choose songs that have a lot of cello or violin or piano. And yeah, and it tells a story, and then it lifts into this point where the viewer has the experience. If it's like Ancestral, for example, there's a point where they heal with the ancestor and they feel the relief. They'll be going through that journey as I guide them. And then they go into bliss. That's why I call it Intuity bliss, so that each time there's a major release and someone's able to feel that joy, that bliss. That's the natural state of being when we're not dampened down by our healing issues.
So if someone was going to experience an ancestral healing with you, what would that look like, or what would that experience be like?
Well, if it was on Intuity Bliss, it'd be in the way I'd shared. If it was one of my bespoke healing programs, then it'd be one-on-one, and I would speak to them. I'd find out what we're tracing, and then I'd play music, relax them into the body. So the music would be selected just for them for this particular journey. And then the music comes down, I speak again, and I take them on this journey of tracing emotion back from this life into ancestrally, like you do with who's first, a mother, grandmother, for example, and then from grandmother all the way back to where this started, and in helping them engage their senses. So we feel the energetic world through seeing, feeling, hearing, and knowing in my work. So there's 4 main senses, and most people that find their way into my clinic have at least one of those senses open. So the art of helping people break through is engaging them in the sense that they have, because they're not necessarily on a training course, they're on a healing session. So if they've only got feeling, then it's important not to keep guiding them into seeing. And it's like, oh, well, I can't see who the ancestor is, but no, can you feel? Yeah, they feel sad to me. Great. So let's focus on that. Yeah? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Now, how do you think that music helps us get into our heart?
I think music is profound. It's like the artist's channel, and with the best music, of course. You know, like I saw Ludovico Einaudi in Lisbon last month, and he's an absolute master of his craft. And we get to, as healers, we get to bring in the mastery of others and to move people through the music that's been created. And yeah, for me, it's an intrinsic part of healing to be able to use that.
Great information. Now, you talk in your work about root healing. What is root healing in your professional opinion?
Root healing is being able to access all of the roots to an expression, an issue. So, for example, if you have someone who's depressed and they feel lonely, and you trace it to when they were age 5 and they have a big shift with something with their mum not coming back when they said they would, but the issue's still there, then you haven't healed a root, you've healed some, part of something. But maybe the root is younger, that could be one example. Or maybe the root is younger and past life and ancestral. So it's like, and there's other areas that we haven't discussed in this interview that the roots could be, but it's the ability to take people into all of the roots. And when I'm teaching in my academy, it's module 3, they get the chance to do healings live with the guys that are studying the practitioner training. And they will typically pick one of the thing that they can see the most and create a shift, but they haven't got all of the areas. So I'm coaching them in that particular module how to, in one healing session, get all 3 areas, say, shift it, and then see the difference in their client when they're able to let go in that way.
Yes, and I agree with you that when we're wanting to clear, it's really critical that we identify all the roots, whether it be from our ancestors, from our past lives, and also emotions. So in addition to past life healing and ancestral healing, what are you think, will you give an overview for our audience about other aspects of root healing?
Yeah, so one area that comes up a lot at the moment is interdimensional. So it's like we live in this earth duality, but all of our incarnations may not have been in this particular realm of consciousness. So when we trace things like that, they can not make that much sense to the mind, but it's the same effects. Once you shift it, then the root can not be in the system anymore. And I think one thing for the audience that is really important, and that from my perspective, is that these things aren't necessarily true or real. Like, yes, we can say we had a past life, but for someone who's quite analytical, wants facts, like the most important thing is that it's a story that's imprinted in the consciousness. And by identifying that there's a past life and this character that we were had a certain wound is playing out, it allows us to engage with the story that's in us and to shift it. So as much as I absolutely believe in and teach these realms, it's also the most important thing is not to strongly hold that it's real. And then as we enter more out there experiences like interdimensional, it's much easier to engage with it and not try and hold it. And so the other areas is like the shadow realm. So we live in duality, and you get the extreme beautiful light, like the seraphim, the angels, and then you get the shadow beings and experiences and everything in between. And so as you learn to engage with duality, then it's possible to learn non-duality healing and really collapse all of the stories that we've engaged with in those different realms of dark to light. So roots can be held in any of those areas. And another big root is power loss. So if you've traced things and they're still not really shifted fully, it might be that your power has been lost, given away into people, places, experiences, or even your soul. In shamanism, there's soul retrieval. So you know, a root may not be complete until the soul part, for example, is retrieved through the presence of the guides, the healer, and brought back into the recipient's system. So there's many things. So these are just some examples to help you understand. Yeah.
Now, for our audience, Keith Hodge, founder of Intuity International, what is power retrieval and what is soul retrieval? Can you explain those two things for our audience?
Yeah. So the first step, as we've talked about, is heart. To live in the heart. In my foundation course, I teach the heart and the senses, and don't need to go back into that. That's the first step. The second step is the power. So it's lower down in the body. There's a place called the sex chakra, midway between the navel and the pubic bone, and it's a really important center of us. And one of the qualities that it holds is our power. It's like connected to the lower dantian, and a lot of people have given away their power to society's parents and the way things should be. And if that's you, then it may be difficult, even when you have a sense, this is what I need to do in my heart, it will remain a dream or something I'm going to do one day, because we need our power to step and say, yes, I'm going to leave this country. I'm going to change my job. I'm going to say yes to this relationship and have kids. It's like we need our power in our heart. And so power retrieval is a journey to reclaim the power. The technique I've developed with it is through the breath, and it's finding all the places that we've given it away and bringing it back into our body. And of course, someone will only go as far as they're capable of at that time, depending on the other healing issues. So it's kind of in conjunction with healing, power retrieval. And soul retrieval is, I guess it's similar in a way, but soul loss happens through trauma. So when we go through a difficult experience, one of the ways we can protect ourselves is to maybe avoid or to go inward. It's like a hollowness when the soul loss. And so a part of our consciousness temporarily leaves. That temporarily might be many lives, but it's temporary because you can't actually lose your soul. But you can put it away so that you can function in a war, or when there's persecution, or etc. And so as we do the healing, it's also important to be discerning, is there anything to retrieve back into the being in front of me? And when we retrieve the soul parts, it feels incredibly beautiful. That's my experience of it. And then qualities that they didn't maybe have access to, like being able to sing or expressed or to be bold, etc., that they re-embody into the system. And that's the difference between those two. Yeah.
Beautiful. And we started this interview talking about ancestral healing. And when you do ancestral healing with clients, Keith Hodge, what are the biggest pieces of wisdom that you learn from the ancestors that you've worked with?
You're asking what is the wisdom of the ancestors?
Yes. What are the biggest pieces of wisdom that when you work with clients that you've had brought forward?
I think that the biggest wisdom is to be shown where the blockages are. And it's I think if you take certain cultures, then there's a lot of wisdom in, like, if you took Native Americans, or like someone with shamanism in their society, then the ancestors have a lot of wisdom to give. And in the West, the wisdom is maybe being more created now. And I don't personally go into looking, and I know a lot of shamanic traditions go for the wisdom of ancestors, and that's not something I teach, and I'm always open to it, and I've seen it a few times, like ancestors saying for someone they need to open their heart, or this is the root of their problem, or but the approach I have is let's work with masters, people who've transformed. And now if an ancestor has become a master, then spectacular. But usually ancestors haven't evolved their consciousness to mastery. They've got as far as they've got in their soul's journey, and probably they're reincarnated right now, having another experience somewhere. So my approach is let's work with the guys, the ascended masters who don't need to come back, and who are very, very wise, and to channel those guys. And I go into the ancestry to look at what is wounded, what needs to release, so that this thread doesn't need to pass on to future generations.
Fascinating. I would say, if you ask me, I think the biggest thing that people get when they work with their ancestors is that they are still loved unconditionally, and that their ancestors are rooting for them and wanting them to succeed, and that they're being loved every moment, and that they're not, and that you're not alone. You're loved, you're not alone, and you have your ancestors on your side.
Beautiful.
Yes, you've been listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 best-selling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Our guest today has been an International Healing Academy teacher, Keith Hodge. He is the founder of Intuity International, and you can find out more about Keith Hodge and his wonderful work at his website, intuityinternational.com. And remember, if there is a pattern that you've been struggling with and you have not been able to clear it, there may be ancestral roots that you can heal. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.